The first time my new division head called my work a vacation, he did it in front of 32 people and a projected slide deck with my name still sitting in the bottom corner of the compliance roadmap I had built. He smiled when he said it too. Not a nervous smile. Not the kind people use when they know they are stepping into territory they do not understand. It was a polished, confident little smirk, the kind that belongs to a person who has never been forced to clean up the damage from his own mouth. We are not paying for luxury European tours anymore, he said, tapping the screen with a laser pointer like he was delivering a TED talk instead of publicly gutting a process he had not even taken the time to read. If a task can be done digitally, it will be done digitally. We are done confusing old habits with business necessity. A few people shifted in their chairs. A few looked down. One person kept typing, though the sharp clicks of her nails against the keyboard were so exaggerated it was obvious she was pretending not to listen. I sat there with my hands folded over a legal pad and let him finish. My name is Mara Ellison. I was 38 years old that spring, and I had spent almost 19 years building the international compliance structure that kept our medical distribution company operating in 6 foreign markets without a major licensing failure, custom seizure, or regulatory freeze. 19 years of calls before dawn. 19 years of emergency document reviews in hotel rooms. The 19 years of learning how to read the tone of an email from a German agency based on whether the closing line used one courtesy word or two. None of that impressed men like Derek Halloway. He had arrived 12 business days earlier with a fresh executive title, an expensive haircut, and the kind of MBA confidence that makes a person believe a spreadsheet is the same thing as judgment. He liked phrases like optimization, agility, lean execution. He said them with the force of revelation, as if no one in the building had ever thought to cut waste before he blessed us with his vocabulary. The Berlin trip he had just mocked was not a vacation. It was 3 days of meetings with licensing officials, trade compliance representatives, and an external auditor who had known me long enough to trust my documentation when everyone else in the room was still flipping through translated guidelines. It was the reason our European registration renewals moved cleanly through a system that had no patience for preventable mistakes. It was the reason distributors answered my calls. It was the reason customs delays usually died before they had the chance to become disasters. But Derek did not want context. He wanted theater. He had called the meeting to announce what he named a modernization initiative, which was how he described taking a working system, stripping out the experienced parts, and then presenting the wreckage as innovation. When he finally looked at me, the room did too. Mara, he said, and in that falsely generous tone men use when they are about to insult you and want credit for including you. I know change can feel personal when people have been attached to certain routines for a long time, but the company is moving forward. I held his gaze. Okay, I said, that was all. Not because I agreed, not because I was stunned into silence, and not because I lacked the facts to dismantle him in front of every person in that room. I said okay because I had already heard the door close in my mind. There are moments in a career when you realize someone has mistaken your calm for dependence. They think because you are measured, because you are not loud, because you do not turn every meeting into a performance, that you must also be replaceable. They assume the system exists by magic, that the trains run because they have always run, that the person quietly keeping disaster away is simply occupying a chair. That was the moment I understood Derek believed exactly that. And if he wanted to learn differently, I was no longer interested in protecting him from the lesson. If you have ever sat in a room while someone insulted the thing you built and everybody else chose their mortgage over their conscience, then you know exactly the kind of silence I mean. It is not empty. It hums. It presses into your ribs. It tells you who is brave, who is weak, and who will absolutely claim later that they had concerns all along. The meeting ended with polite applause, actual applause. I remember that part because it was so obscene it almost became funny. As people filed out, my friend Nina from legal slowed beside my chair and murmured, "You all right?" I looked down at my notes, and my handwriting was perfectly steady. "Never better," I said. She studied me for half a second too long. "That usually means the opposite." Not this time. But the truth was more complicated than anger. I was angry, yes. I was humiliated too. Public humiliation has its own temperature, cold at first, then hot enough to sit behind your eyes all afternoon. Still, what settled deepest in me was not rage. It was recognition. I knew what Derek had done. He had not just mocked a trip. He had broken chain of responsibility in public. He had signaled to everyone in that room that my judgment was now ornamental, that my role could be sliced apart, redistributed, and explained away as legacy overhead. Once a leader does that, the damage is rarely confined to one meeting. It spreads. People start excluding you from decisions. And junior staff stop copying you on questions. Mistakes no longer rise through the right channels because the channel itself has been declared old fashioned. By 3 that afternoon, the first symptom arrived. An email from Derek's new operations coordinator, a 24-year-old named Peyton, hit my inbox with the subject line, Transition of International Regulatory Tasks. Per Derek's revised structure, she wrote, all European licensing communications, document routing, and deadline tracking would now move through his office for streamlined accountability. I read that line twice. Streamlined accountability. That is the sort of phrase people invent when they want authority without understanding. Peyton had joined the company less than 3 months earlier. She was cheerful, eager, very polished, and entirely unequipped to distinguish between a customs declaration issue and a renewal variance warning. Once, during a scheduling meeting, she had asked whether CE certification was more of a branding thing or a legal thing. I had thought she was joking. She was not. I forwarded her every active file connected to the summer renewal cycle. The contact sheets, historical notes, regulatory correspondence, prior year submission timelines, internal escalation rules, a checklist I had refined over 6 renewal cycles and 3 restructuring attempts. I copied Derek. My email was precise, polite, and impossible to misread. Per your updated structure, I am forwarding all current materials related to European renewal compliance. This includes active contacts, historical filings, required submission documents, and internal deadline trackers. Please confirm receipt and advise if further support is required. Best, Mara. I stared at the screen for a moment before sending it, then I added one final line. Please note that several deadlines within this cycle are fixed by regulator response windows and will not shift based on internal restructuring. Then I hit send. No response came that day, none the next morning either. By the 3rd day, I had my answer, not in words, in behavior. Derek kept holding meetings about efficiency. Peyton kept popping in and out of his office with pastel notebooks and color-coded binders. I heard phrases like resource consolidation and cross-functional simplification drift through the hall. My access to one of the external licensing dashboards was quietly reduced. A standing call I had led every spring for 6 years was canceled and replaced with an internal alignment check-in I was not invited to. They were not transitioning responsibility carefully. They were staging a removal. I began documenting everything. That is the thing about people who survive in compliance for long enough. We become historians against our own will, not because we enjoy paperwork, because memory is useless if it cannot be proved. I saved emails to a private archive. I exported calendar histories. I took screenshots of revision logs on submission files I no longer had editing access to. I kept written notes after meetings, including who said what at what time and under which pretense. At home, I started carrying a slim black notebook in my tote. I wrote in it at night while the dishwasher ran and the city lights from the building across the street flickered over my kitchen table. Not dramatic reflections. Facts, dates, language used, responsibilities reassigned, warnings ignored. People think revenge begins with fury. Mine began with indexing. That week, Derek gave another speech, this one during a budget review. He stood near the front of the conference room, one hand tucked into his pocket, and clicked through slides showing projected savings from travel reform. There it was in a neat blue box. Eliminate annual in-person EU compliance visit. Projected savings $11,400. $11,400. That was the number he had assigned to the process that protected a revenue stream worth more than his entire department's annual bonus structure. He glanced toward me again when he read it aloud. I smiled, small, pleasant, controlled. The kind of smile that says you are making a note, not a scene. Later, while I stirred powdered creamer into burnt office coffee, one of the analysts from finance leaned in and said, honestly, I don't know how you're staying so calm. I looked at the beige swirl in my cup. Practice, I said. But really, it was because something had shifted inside me. And once it did, calm became easy. For years, I had carried the company on instinct. I filled gaps before others even saw them. I corrected errors nobody knew they had made. I protected revenue, access, timelines, relationships. Quietly, constantly. I had mistaken that loyalty for mutual respect. Now I could see the truth more clearly than I ever had. The company loved what I prevented, not what I knew. And Derek loved the appearance of control more than control itself. And both of them believed I would keep rescuing them, no matter how carelessly they treated me. That belief was the real insult. The annual renewal date was less than 7 weeks away. I knew the timeline by heart. I also knew the warning windows, the correction periods, the way one overlooked regulator email could unravel into shipment holds, system restrictions, and contractual exposure across multiple countries. Not overnight, worse than overnight. Gradually enough for the wrong people to dismiss the first signs until the damage became expensive. I had carried that knowledge like a reflex for years. Now it sat in me differently, heavy, sharp, waiting. On the last Friday of March, after most of the floor had emptied, I opened my desk drawer and took out a fresh flash drive. I copied every document I was still ethically entitled to preserve for record keeping. Historical filings I had authored, internal policy versions, submission timelines, my own notes, my communication trail. Then I locked the drive in the small fireproof box I kept at home under tax records and my late mother's jewelry case. Not because I planned to do anything reckless, because I knew with the kind of certainty that comes only from long experience that Derek Halloway was going to make a very expensive mistake. And when he did, I would need more than memory. I would need sequence. I would need proof. I would need to be able to show, with the clean brutality of timestamps and signatures, exactly when the company chose arrogance over competence. That night, I left the office after sunset. The elevator smelled faintly of steel and stale air conditioning. In the lobby, the security guard gave me the same nod he always did, the one reserved for people whose habits made them part of the building. Outside, spring rain had just started, thin at first, cool against my face. I stood beneath the awning for a moment and looked back up at the dark glass of the tower. There is a point before a structure fails when it still looks perfectly intact. That is the dangerous part, not the collapse, the confidence right before it. I watched the lights glowing on Derek's floor and realized I was no longer trying to save what he was breaking. I was waiting to see how far he would take it. And for the first time in a very long time, my silence was not obedience. It was strategy. By the second week of April, Derek had started behaving like a man who believed survival and competence were the same thing. He had survived his first month. The executives liked his slide decks. Finance liked his cost-cutting language. The younger managers liked that he spoke in punchy slogans instead of caution. He had the kind of charisma that works beautifully in short windows. If you did not have to live inside the consequences of his decisions, he could almost seem impressive. That was the problem with men like him. They were often at their most admired right before the damage became measurable. He rolled out his new structure in phases. First came the travel freeze, then the centralized oversight model, which really meant routing specialized regulatory tasks through people who had never handled them before. Then came access reviews, calendar consolidation, and the cancellation of several standing compliance check-ins he called legacy redundancy. Every phrase he used made destruction sound clean. I stopped correcting him in public after the third meeting, not because I had given up on the work, because I had stopped wasting expertise on people who were using ignorance as branding. He mistook that restraint for surrender. In one Monday meeting, he actually smiled at me and said, "I appreciate your flexibility, Mara." Change is easier when senior people model openness. It took effort not to laugh in his face. Instead, I nodded once and wrote down the exact sentence in my black notebook after the meeting. Date, time, witnesses. If anyone had asked me then whether I was planning revenge, I would have said no, because revenge suggests emotion as the driver. What I was doing felt colder than that. I was studying the architecture of a fall. The first real crack appeared in a harmless-looking email chain about vendor documentation. One of our distributors in Munich requested confirmation on a revised authorization file that should have been routine. The message went to Peyton instead of me, She forwarded it to Derek with a note asking whether this was something ops handles now or something legal-ish. Legal-ish. That was the level of precision now standing between our company and foreign regulators. Derek replied all, including the distributor, and told him we were currently simplifying that entire compliance workflow and would revert with an updated packet. Simplifying. The distributor wrote back within 12 minutes, more formal this time. I'm asking whether our current registration remained uninterrupted during the transition. I saw the thread only because one of the analysts in logistics forwarded it to me privately with a single line. Thought you'd want to know. I read it twice, then archived it in the folder I had created on my home computer under a name so bland nobody would ever open it by accident. Municipal parking forms. Inside it were subfolders organized by month, event type, and risk category. That night, I ate dinner standing at my kitchen counter, one heel off, one still on, reading through old submission history with the television muted in the background. My apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the rain tapping softly against the window above the sink. I remember thinking how strange it was that my whole professional life could be reduced by one arrogant man into a savings line and a sarcastic joke. Not erased, reduced. There is a difference. Erasure is clean. Reduction is humiliating. They keep you around just enough to benefit from your existence while stripping away the authority that made your work effective in the first place. That was Derek's strategy with me. He did not want me gone yet. He wanted me visible and diminished. A lesson to everyone else about what happened to people who belonged to the old way of doing things. What he did not understand was that humiliation changes shape over time. In the beginning, it burns. After a while, it hardens into clarity. And clarity is dangerous. By late April, Peyton had started asking me questions in the hallway again. And not official questions, not copied on email. Casual ones. The kind people use when they want help without leaving evidence that they needed it. What was the name of that external consultant in Frankfurt? Do you remember if those portals required dual authentication every year or only after changes? Did you usually send originals or scans first? I answered politely. Briefly. Never enough to become responsible again. Once near the elevator, she lowered her voice and said, I'm kind of getting the feeling this process is more layered than Derek thought. I pressed the lobby button. It usually is. She gave a thin little laugh. He says people overcomplicate things to protect turf. I turned toward her then. Does he? She looked at me, waiting. I held her gaze just long enough to make her uncomfortable, and then stepped into the elevator when the doors opened. That was answer enough. A week later, Derek removed me from another call. This one with our external compliance advisor in Europe, a severe woman named Ingrid, who had once told me over bitter coffee that she trusted very few Americans but tolerated me because I read footnotes. I found out I had been removed when the calendar cancellation hit my inbox 4 minutes after the meeting began. No explanation, no note, just gone. I sat at my desk and stared at the screen until the anger passed through me and settled somewhere quieter. Then I opened Outlook, exported the cancellation history, and saved it. At lunch, Nina from legal came by with salad and sat on the corner of my desk. You look too calm, she said. That seems to be a theme. I'm serious. So am I. She set her fork down. But are you going to fight this? I looked past her at the far wall of windows where gray clouds had flattened the afternoon into one color. No, I said, her eyebrows lifted. She knew me too well to mistake tone for defeat. What are you going to do then? Watch. She was silent for a second. That sounds worse. It probably is. The truth was that I had started to see the coming damage in layers. First, there would be missed signals, small things, questions answered late, deadlines treated like guidelines, routine requests delayed because nobody knew which folder contained what. Derek would dismiss these as transition noise. Then there would be the first preventable warning, something formal enough to matter but still small enough for him to explain away. He would blame communication gaps, temporary restructuring pains, legacy documentation practices. He would say all the words men say when they think language can outrun consequence. After that, the machine would start taking pieces, shipments, access, confidence, money. And somewhere inside that process, Somebody would finally need the woman they had spent months sidelining. I just did not know how expensive the need would become before they admitted it. In May, Derek held a division town hall. He loved town halls, loved microphones, loved the little pause before applause, loved projecting certainty across a room of people who needed paychecks more than truth. He stood on the small stage in the multi-purpose conference space with a handheld clicker and a wireless headset, as if he were launching a product instead of narrating his own ignorance. One slide was titled Strategic Cost Wins. There, and beneath consultant reduction and vendor renegotiation, sat the line he was proudest of: eliminated non essential Europe compliance travel, annual savings $46,200. The number was inflated, of course it was. He had bundled related costs into a headline figure to make the cut look more heroic. He even laughed after reading it aloud. Turns out digital signatures are cheaper than airport lounges. A burst of laughter scattered through the room. Nervous from some people, eager from others. Finance clapped. Someone 2 rows ahead of me said, "Love that." I sat perfectly still. I could feel the blood moving in my neck, hot and steady. That Derek looked at me from the stage while the laughter faded. There are many kinds of contempt. The loud kind is easy. The polished kind delivered through charm and plausible deniability. I was what leaves bruises no one else wants to acknowledge. When the meeting ended, he came down from the stage, still carrying the microphone, and stopped near my chair. "No hard feelings, I hope," he said softly, smiling like a man offering grace instead of insult. I looked up at him. "About the joke," he added. I took my time answering. "None at all." He smiled wider, relieved. That was the moment I knew he truly believed I would continue absorbing humiliation as long as he wrapped it in professional language. What he heard was compliance. What I meant was not even close. That same week, the first regulator inquiry came through a channel Derek had forgotten still included my name on a copied archive list. It was not the final renewal notice yet, just a procedural request tied to updated identification records and submission sequencing. And nothing catastrophic, still important. The kind of message that mattered precisely because it looked ordinary. I read it at 5:18 in the morning with my first cup of coffee warming my hands and the city barely awake beyond my apartment windows. The sky outside was still blue-gray. A bus hissed somewhere below. The regulator's note was concise, formal, and very clear about timing. Action required within the response window. I forwarded it to Peyton and Derek without commentary. No warning, no explanation. Just a message, a clean handoff. Peyton replied 3 hours later. "Thanks. We're on it. We're on it." That phrase should have comforted me. Instead, it landed in my stomach like lead. Because people who are truly on it do not usually need to announce that they are. I marked the date in my notebook. Then I waited. 3 days passed. No further threat activity. No attached response draft. No meeting request. No follow-up. I checked the external portal from the limited view I still had. Nothing had been uploaded. That was when the quiet grief started. It surprised me how personal it felt. Not because I missed the power. I missed the integrity of being part of a system that, for all its flaws, once functioned because enough people respected reality. Derek did not. And every day under his leadership seemed to reward image over substance a little more openly. Around that time, my mother called and asked if I was sleeping. I laughed. That made her go quiet. "What happened?" she asked. I had never told her much about work. She believed all corporations were some variation of theater and weakness, and honestly, she was not wrong often enough for me to dismiss her. New leadership," I said. "That bad?" "Worse, confident." She made a soft sound of understanding. "Then stop saving them." I leaned against my kitchen counter, phone tucked between shoulder and cheek, staring at the rain marks on the glass. "I already have." "Good." That was all she said. But I carried it with me. Stop saving them. There was something almost holy in that sentence. By the end of May, the office had shifted around me in subtle ways. People were kinder in private, more careful in public. A few stopped joking with Derek altogether. Others attached themselves even harder to him, sensing he still held the visible power and wanting to survive on the right side of it. Peyton looked tired. Derek looked shinier than ever. I became quieter, not withdrawn, sharper. I stopped filling silence for other people. They stopped volunteering context in meetings where context was treated as obstruction, stopped rescuing vague directives by translating them into functional action. If someone wanted my opinion, they had to ask for it clearly. Most did not. That was fine. At my desk, beside my monitor, I placed a small yellow sticky note where only I could read it. No names, no explanation, just a date. June 17th. Anyone else would have thought it was a reminder. For me, it was a clock. And as the days moved one after another toward that date, I could feel the whole company continuing to build its confidence on the top of a fault line only I seemed willing to see. I did not warn them again. I had already been warned enough by their silence. June arrived with that false summer brightness that makes office disasters feel almost unreal. The mornings were warmer. The sidewalks outside the building smelled faintly of rain and dust before the heat settled in. People started talking about long weekends and rooftop dinners and whose children had camp schedules. Inside the office, the air stayed cold enough to keep everyone slightly uncomfortable, and Derek kept striding through it like a man whose reflection was giving him daily performance reviews. He had made himself the face of a transformation. That was what he called it now. Not restructuring, not streamlining, transformation. Every all hands email had some version of the same language. We are evolving, we are simplifying, we are aligning around modern execution. He wrote like a man, trying to impress future interviewers. Every sentence sounded prepared for the day he would tell some other company how bravely he had dragged us out of inefficiency. Meanwhile, the actual work had started fraying in places too small for anyone important to notice. A missing attachment here, an unanswered foreign distributor question there, a revised document uploaded under the wrong category. Nothing dramatic, not yet. That was the problem with real collapse. It almost never announced itself with music. It started in quiet rooms, in skimmed emails, in assumptions made by people who did not understand that some systems only looked forgiving because someone's experience had been cushioning every impact for years. By then, I had stopped carrying my black notebook only at home. It lived in my bag, wrapped inside a plain file sleeve. I wrote in it in parking garages, in the break room, once even in the restroom stall after overhearing Peyton whisper crying into her phone that she did not know what half the German agency wanted from her. I did not interrupt. I stood at the sink, washing my hands, while the paper towel dispenser groaned and the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and I listened to the sound of panic trying to keep itself polite. When she came out, mascara still intact but her face pale around the eyes, she froze when she saw me. For a second, I thought she might ask for help. Instead, she straightened her blazer and said, "Long morning." I dried my hands slowly. "Yes," I said, "I imagine it is." Then I walked out. I was not proud of that moment, but I did not regret it either. People always want women like me to be better than the men who humiliate us. Kinder, more generous. I'm more willing to understand the pressure everyone else is under. There is always this unspoken expectation that if we are truly competent, truly mature, truly secure, then we will keep extending grace long after grace has turned into unpaid labor for people who help strip our authority away. I was done with that. Not cruel. Done. The final renewal notice came in on a Monday at 4:12 a.m. I know the exact time because I was awake already. Insomnia had become part of my routine by then. I would wake before dawn, make coffee in the dark, and sit at the narrow table by my apartment window, with the city still half asleep below me. Delivery trucks moved like shadows, early trains hissed in the distance. My kitchen smelled faintly of coffee grounds and lemon dish soap. Those were the quietest hours of my day, and also the clearest. When the email arrived, my phone buzzed against the tabletop once. I opened it and felt the old instinct fire through me so fast it almost made me sick. There it was. Formal renewal link, updated identification requirements, final deadline, penalty language, everything exactly where it should be, written in the same concise, severe tone I had seen every year. Action required by June 17th. Failure to comply may result in immediate license deactivation and financial penalties under the relevant framework. No softness, no ambiguity, no room for ego. For one reckless second, I considered handling it anyway, not publicly, quietly. I knew enough legacy access points. I knew enough people. I knew exactly which call to make, exactly which document would need to be corrected, and exactly how to keep the machine running while letting Derek keep his dignity. My finger hovered over the keyboard. Then I looked at the thread history, my own March email forwarding responsibility, Derek's written directive assigning all future licensing coordination to Peyton's team, the meeting notes, the access changes, the months of ridicule wrapped in management language. I sat back in my chair and let my hand fall away from the laptop. Then I forwarded the email to Peyton, copied Derek, no added text, no warning banner, no urgent typed by me, just the message itself. Clean. Transfer complete. Now I closed the laptop and watched dawn slowly turn the buildings outside from charcoal to gray. That was the moment more than any other when I crossed fully from survival into control. Not because I was causing what came next, and because I finally accepted that preventing it was no longer my responsibility. At the office that morning, Peyton did not mention the email. Neither did Derek. I passed his glass office twice and saw him in back-to-back meetings, gesturing at screens, nodding at people, performing leadership. Peyton moved around the floor with her usual over-organized urgency, tumbler in hand, laptop hugged against her chest, smile too bright by half. At noon, I checked the limited portal view I still had. No upload. At 3:30, still nothing. At 5:15, the renewal file remained untouched. I packed my bag, locked my drawer, and left on time for the first time in weeks. It felt almost obscene. The sky outside was streaked pink and gold. A group from marketing was laughing near the entrance, already halfway into after-work drinks. And someone called my name and asked if I wanted to join them. I smiled, thanked them, and kept walking toward the train. On the ride home, I stared at my reflection in the darkening window and felt something inside me go very still. Not happy, not vindicated, certain. The next morning, the office was buzzing about Derek's latest initiative, a company retreat built around cross-functional alignment and reinvention. There were posters near the elevators by then, bright colors, slogans. One of them actually said, "Build the future, don't cling to the past." I looked at it for a long moment while waiting for the elevator. The future apparently included inflatable team building courses and artisanal coffee stations. It did not include reading foreign compliance notices before their deadlines expired. 3 days later, Peyton left for a resort trip. I learned that by accident. Or maybe not by accident. Offices are ecosystems built on accidental information. She had put her out of office on earlier than she meant to, and it triggered when Nina copied her on a minor contract question. Out of office until Monday, limited access to email. For urgent matters, contact Derek Halloway. I read that line twice. Then I looked down at the date on my monitor's sticky note. June 14th, 3 days. That afternoon, I checked the portal again. Still blank, no submission, no supporting documents uploaded, no payment confirmation, nothing. I felt the blood drain from my face, so suddenly I had to sit very still for a moment. People imagine revenge as a thrill, a satisfaction, a dark smile spreading slowly while someone else walks toward the trap. That is fantasy. A real consequence, when you understand its full size before everyone else, feels lonelier than that, heavier, almost holy in its inevitability. I went to the restroom, locked myself into the far stall, and breathed through the first wave of adrenaline. My palms were cold, my heartbeat was hard and slow. I could hear two women talking near the sinks about dinner plans, one of them laughing about a dating app disaster. The normality of it made me want to scream. Instead, I took out my phone and opened the folder where I had saved every relevant email thread. I checked the dates again, the delegation memo, my forwarded materials, the regulator notices, the out of office reply. Then I added screenshots to the archive and saved them. When I came back to my desk, Derek was standing beside it. He had one hand in his pocket and the mild and superior expression he wore when he wanted to remind me he still believed he had the upper hand. "Quick question," he said. "Did you ever have issues with one of the German portals not reflecting current statuses right away?" Peyton mentioned something looked odd, but I assume it's just a lag issue. There are moments when the universe gives you an opening so precise it feels scripted. I looked up at him. "What looked odd?" He shrugged. "Something about account visibility. I didn't dig into it." Then I couldn't say. He gave a short laugh, as if we were sharing some small, harmless office mystery. Right. Well, I'm sure it's nothing. I held his gaze. Yes, I said, I'm sure you are. He studied me for a fraction too long, like something in my tone had brushed against his instincts. Then he nodded and walked away. I watched him cross the floor, polished shoes, tailored jacket, easy confidence. A man standing in sunlight on a frozen lake. That evening, I did not go straight home. I drove instead to a little office supply store 2 neighborhoods over and bought 3 fresh flash drives, a legal pad, and a box of manila folders. Then I stopped for Thai takeout I barely touched and spent most of the night at my dining table, building what I privately labeled the collapse file. Every document in sequence, every email, every calendar removal, every access revision, every direct assignment, every regulator notice, every screenshot of inactivity, every point at which a preventable problem had been handed to people who were too arrogant, too inexperienced, or too distracted to respect it. I printed hard copies too, not because paper is magical, but because printed evidence has a different gravity when laid on a table. Screens invite excuses. Paper feels like fact. By midnight, the folder was tabbed and ordered. By 1 in the morning, I had created 2 digital backups and locked them separately. By 2, I was standing barefoot in my kitchen, drinking cold water in the dark, looking out at the city lights and understanding with perfect clarity that the line had been crossed. Not by me, by them. I slept for perhaps 3 hours. On June 17th, nothing happened. That was the most terrible part. No explosion, no sirens, no panicked company-wide email. Just a normal Wednesday full of meetings, vending machine coffee, muted conversations, and Derek presenting updates to senior leadership as if the machinery beneath him were intact. The deadline passed quietly. That is what made it deadly. And because bureaucratic failure often travels slower than human denial. The damage had begun, but the people responsible had not felt it yet, which meant they still believed there was time. There was not. June 18th passed the same way. June 19th, too, until just after 8 a.m., when the first message came in from our European operations team. Portal access suspended. Please advise. I read it once, then again. Outside my office window, the summer light was bright and clean. Somebody in the hallway was laughing. An espresso machine hissed in the kitchenette. The building smelled faintly of toner and over air-conditioned carpet. Inside me, everything went cold. I set down my coffee very carefully and opened a fresh page in my notebook. The first line I wrote was simple. It begins. The first real panic hit just before 9, not the dramatic kind. That's not shouting, not doors slamming. Real panic in a corporate office starts small. It shows up as speed. People walking too fast, messages sent without punctuation, calls made from conference rooms with the glass doors half closed, like privacy itself might still be enough to contain the damage. The second message from Europe came 7 minutes after the first. Urgent. Customs is flagging 2 active shipments under inactive registration status. Need confirmation immediately. Then another. Client platform access in Munich appears restricted. Is this related? I sat at my desk with my notebook open and watched the building begin to vibrate around the problem without yet understanding its size. My coffee had gone untouched. The steam was gone. The top had developed that thin, oily skin office coffee gets when it cools too fast. But across the aisle, one of the analysts leaned toward his screen and whispered, "What the hell?" The answer was simple. Expiration. Expiration was always more brutal than people imagine. Not because it was dramatic, but because systems built around legal validity do not care about optimism. A license is either active or it is not. Once it lapses, software reacts. Customs reacts, vendors react, regulators react, contracts begin to wobble, revenue loses its legal footing. Nothing personal about it, nothing emotional. Just a machine recognizing that a required condition no longer exists. At 9:11, Derek stormed out of his office and called for Peyton. Silence answered him. Then someone from operations, a young guy named Luis, said carefully, "She's still out, I think." Derek stopped in the middle of the aisle. Out where? No one answered for a second. Finally, Luis said, "Vacation." That one word seemed to hit the room like a drop plate. Derek looked around as if one of us had invented her absence just to inconvenience him. Why is she out this week? Nobody said what everyone was thinking, which was that managers generally know when the people they put in charge of critical work are off grid during deadline windows. He snapped for IT, then for operations, then for someone in legal. His voice kept rising, not enough to become unprofessional, but enough that you could hear the shape of his fear underneath it. At 9:24, a Slack message came through to a wider internal channel. Anyone familiar with EU licensing portal issues, please advise immediately. Please advise immediately. I stared at that phrase with the strangest sense of distance. The same people who had spent months treating my work as administrative clutter were now tossing a net into the office and hoping expertise might magically crawl back into their hands. My name was not used, not yet. Pride still had a few breaths left in it. I opened the message thread, read the replies, and said nothing. A systems analyst suggested clearing cached credentials. Someone in tech asked whether this might be a permission sync issue. Another person wondered if it was related to regional server maintenance. I closed the window. No one wanted the real answer because the real answer was legal, and legal answers have memory. They expose decision trails. They attach consequences to names. At 9:37, my desk phone rang. I looked at it for 3 full beats before picking up. Mara, Derek said without preamble. I need you in conference B. Not could you, not please, need. I turned slowly in my chair and looked through the glass wall of his office to the corridor beyond. People were moving faster now. Nina from legal was already carrying a laptop and a folder. The CFO's assistant had appeared on our floor, which was never a good sign. I'm in the middle of something, I said, a pause. Then clipped and tight. This can't wait. I let the silence stretch just long enough to change the balance of the conversation. I'll be there in 5. When I walked into conference B, the room smelled like stress and stale air conditioning. Derek was at the head of the table, jacket off, sleeves rolled once, face slightly shiny at the temples. Nina was there. So was Luis from operations and a pale, exhausted man from IT who looked like he had already explained the same thing 3 times to people who did not want to hear it. On the screen was the portal error. Registration inactive, restricted access, immediate action required through regulator reauthorization process. No ambiguity, no softness. Derek looked up when I entered, and for the first time since he arrived at the company, he did not seem smug. He seemed annoyed that reality had chosen such an inconvenient moment to become undeniable. Mara, he said, have you ever seen this before? I remained standing for a second before taking a seat halfway down the table. Yes. He leaned forward. So how do we fix it? I looked at the screen again, then at him. That depends. On what? On whether the lapse was prevented before deactivation. No one spoke. Derek's jaw tightened. I realized it obviously wasn't. Then this isn't a portal issue. Nina's eyes flicked toward me. Luis shifted in his seat. What does that mean operationally? It means, I said, that the system is reflecting a legal status problem, not a technical one. The IT man exhaled so hard it was almost a laugh. Vindication, brief and bitter. Derek folded his arms. Fine, legal status problem. How do we restore it? I could feel the whole room looking at me now, not as a colleague, as a bridge they had set on fire and now needed to cross. I kept my voice even. There will need to be regulator contact, documentation review, likely emergency resubmission, and probably penalty negotiation depending on how long the account has been inactive. How long? Luis asked quietly. I met his eyes, then looked back at the date on the screen. And today's the 19th. Nobody moved. The deadline was the 17th, I said. The room seemed to lose oxygen. Luis swore softly under his breath. Derek straightened so fast his chair wheels squeaked against the floor. Why wasn't this escalated? Nina looked at him then, really looked at him. I did not answer immediately. Instead, I opened my laptop, pulled up the archived thread, and rotated the screen toward the center of the table. March 3rd. Derek's directive assigning future licensing responsibility to Peyton's office. March 3rd, my acknowledgement. March 4th, my full transfer of files, deadlines, and contact lists. May 26th, Regulator preliminary notice forwarded. June 10th. Additional procedural notice forwarded. June 14th. Final renewal notice forwarded. Each item timestamped. Each sent cleanly. Each documented. No commentary. No embellishment, just sequence. Derek stared at the screen. That's not. It is. Nina cut in, sharper than I had heard her all year. It is exactly that. He turned to her. This was supposed to be a managed transition. It was, I said quietly, from my side. The words landed hard enough that even I felt them. Derek looked back at me as if seeing me clearly for the first time. Not as the quiet senior employee he could sideline with jokes, as a witness. That is the moment men like him hate most. Not when a woman cries, not when she yells, when she can prove. He tried one more angle. Why didn't you say something when you saw there was a risk? I held his gaze. I did, in writing, more than once. Then you removed the responsibility and the access. That is not the same as it. You publicly called the process unnecessary, I said. Son, you reassigned it. You cut the trip. You reduced my involvement. You removed me from the calls. At that point, saying more would have been interference in a structure you insisted was under control. The room went silent again. Not polite silence this time. Judgment. At 10:12, the first message came from a major client in Frankfurt threatening to suspend activity until the status issue was resolved. 10 minutes later, another team flagged a refrigerated shipment being held, pending validation. By then, even Derek had stopped pretending this was temporary confusion. He was barking orders now. Find Peyton, get outside counsel. Why wasn't this in risk review? Who owns the European account relationships right now? Who owns? The irony of that phrase nearly turned my stomach. For years, the answer had been simple. Then he had decided ownership was a wasteful relic. By 11, the CFO was on the floor. By 11:30, the CEO's office requested an emergency executive review. At noon, Peyton finally called in. I was not on speaker for the first minute. I heard only Derek's side. No, I don't care where you are. Did you submit it? I asked if you submitted it. Then louder, no, forwarding it to your folder is not the same thing. He ended the call without goodbye. The conference room felt smaller after that. Nina closed her laptop and looked at me. Do you have a full chronology? Yes. How complete? Complete enough. Derek gave a short, incredulous laugh. You built a file on this? I turned toward him. I kept records of my responsibilities, the transfer and subsequent communications. That is normal. What I did not say was that women in offices like this learn very early that survival often depends on how well you can prove what men insisted would never matter. At 1:15, we were called upstairs. The executive boardroom was cold enough to raise goose flesh on my arms. The air smelled faintly of polished wood, printer toner, and somebody's expensive cologne. Outside the long windows, the city looked bright and indifferent. Inside, the atmosphere was dense enough to choke on. The CEO stood at the far end of the table with two printed documents in front of him. The CFO was seated to his right, pale and furious. General counsel was there. So were two board members who rarely appeared in person unless money had already started bleeding. No one offered coffee. That was how I knew the performance stage was over. The CEO began without greeting. Our European operating status has been deactivated, he said. We are currently facing exposure tied to shipment holds, contract disruption, platform restrictions, and daily penalties. He looked at the CFO. The CFO slid a sheet across the table. Current estimate, she said, voice flat, is just over 100,000 euros per day in direct and associated losses, not including client claims if the outage continues. The number sat in the center of the room like something toxic. Nobody tried to soften it. The CEO turned to Derek. Who made the decision to restructure this process? Derek swallowed. It was part of a broader efficiency initiative. That is not what I asked. A long pause. And I approved the restructuring. And who removed senior compliance from direct control? Derek's face had gone a strange drain color. I signed the transition. The CEO nodded once, then looked at me. Ms. Ellison, I'm told you have documentation. I opened the folder I had brought and laid the printed timeline on the table, tab by tab, email by email, Transfer note, warning notices, reassignment, access reduction, final forwarding, out of office status, inactive portal confirmation. No speech, no performance, just evidence. The board members leaned in. The general counsel took over halfway through, turning pages with careful hands. The sound of paper moving across polished wood seemed impossibly loud. Nobody interrupted, nobody needed to. The story was already there. When the CEO reached the signed reassignment memo, Nikki did not raise his voice. That made it worse. You overrode the experienced owner of a regulatory process tied to foreign revenue, he said to Derek, and replaced that process with what appears to be administrative handoff and no deadline control. Derek opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. I was working from a modernization model that the CEO cut him off with a small movement of his hand. No. Just that, no. It was one of the coldest things I have ever heard. The meeting turned after that. You could feel it. The room stopped trying to understand whether there had been a mistake and started identifying who would carry it. Outside, somewhere far below us, a siren wailed and faded. Inside, Derek's career came apart without a single raised voice. He was placed on immediate leave pending review before 3 o'clock. But Peyton was suspended by phone. General Counsel began coordinating emergency reauthorization and damage containment. The CFO kept repeating numbers like she was trying to punish the air itself with arithmetic. And me? I sat there with my hands folded over the last page of the file and realized I did not feel triumph. Only release, not peace yet, but the first clean edge of it. Because the truth, once laid out properly, no longer needs defending. And after months of being treated like an outdated inconvenience, I had finally become what I had always been, the most dangerous person in the room, the one who remembered everything. By the next morning, Derek's name had disappeared from the internal org chart, not with ceremony, not with some dramatic company-wide confession, just gone. And then that is how institutions protect themselves when a man fails at a high enough level. They do not say collapse. They say transition. They do not say negligence. They say leadership change. They smooth the language until the damage sounds almost civilized. But the floor knew. Offices always know. They knew because Derek's glass office stood open and empty before noon. The frame slogans removed from the wall so quickly you could still see the cleaner rectangles where the paint had been protected from sunlight. They knew because HR was suddenly visible in corners where HR never casually appeared. They knew because nobody from finance was joking anymore. Even the people who had laughed the loudest at his airport lounge line were walking around with the brittle, careful faces of people recalculating their own proximity to failure. I came in early that day. I wore a navy dress, low heels, and the same pearl earrings my mother had given me when I made director level for the first time. My hair was pinned back. My makeup was light. Nothing theatrical, nothing triumphant. I did not want to look like a woman arriving to enjoy revenge. I wanted to look exactly like what they had dismissed. Competent. There was a private meeting waiting for me at 8:30 with the CEO, General Counsel, and the CFO. I knew before I walked in what it would be. Containment, negotiation, regret dressed as opportunity. The boardroom felt different that morning. Same polished table, same over-air conditioned chill, same city skyline beyond the glass. But the energy had shifted from accusation to need. The CEO did not waste time. We are preparing a remediation package, he said. Outside counsel is already in contact with the regulator. We need continuity. We need credibility. We need someone who knows the history, the context, and the sequence. He slid a folder toward me. Inside was a retention offer, title restoration, expanded authority, compensation adjustment, a direct reporting line above the level Derek had occupied, retroactive bonus consideration, executive support for rebuilding the entire international framework. 6 months earlier, I might have looked at that packet and felt something close to gratitude. Now I felt almost nothing. Not because it was not generous, because generosity offered only after catastrophe is just fear with a budget. The CFO leaned forward. Mara, we know this situation was mishandled. Mishandled. What a clean little word for public humiliation, strategic sidelining, and a 7-figure institutional wound. General Counsel spoke next, more honest than the others. Your documentation likely saved us from an even worse outcome. We need your help. There it was. Need. Not appreciation, not respect. Need. I looked down at the packet again. The numbers were impressive, the authority was real. On paper, it was everything ambitious people tell themselves to wait for: vindication in contract language, money, status, belated recognition from the exact people who had let me be diminished while it was still convenient. The problem was that by the time they finally understood my value, something more important had already broken: my trust. I had spent years believing that if my work was excellent enough, consistent enough, undeniable enough, that the institution would eventually behave with some integrity toward the person doing it. I was old enough by then to know better in theory, but there is a difference between knowing something intellectually and watching it prove itself at your expense. I closed the folder. The CEO's expression changed almost immediately, a shadow of anticipation giving way to concern. "I appreciate the offer," I said. That sentence alone made all three of them sit straighter. "But I'm not accepting it." Silence. The kind of silence rich rooms produce when they are unused to hearing no from someone they have just decided to value. The CFO blinked first. "Not accepting the role?" "Not accepting any of it." The CEO exhaled slowly through his nose. "Mara, this is fixable." I looked at him. "For the company, maybe." He started to say something, then stopped. And that was one thing I will give him. Once the truth was directly in front of him, he had at least enough self-awareness not to insult me with fake outrage. He knew what had happened. He knew what had been allowed. And he knew why a larger paycheck could not fully answer it. General Counsel folded her hands. "Are you resigning?" "Yes." The word landed softly, but it changed the whole room. No one moved for a second. Then the CEO said, more quietly than before, "I hoped you wouldn't." "I know." He looked genuinely tired then. Not polished, not executive, just tired. "You could still build this back the right way." I let that sit between us. "I already did," I said, "for years." That was the nearest I ever came to cruelty in that room, and even then it was only the truth. The CEO looked down at the offer packet, then back at me. "What would have made you stay?" The question almost broke my heart, not because I did not know the answer, because he was asking it too late. "Respect before the collapse," I said. No one had anything to say to that. I reached into my bag and took out the envelope I had prepared the night before. My resignation letter was short, formal, final, no speeches, no emotional inventory, just enough language to end the relationship cleanly and preserve my own dignity in the file they would keep forever. I placed it on top of the offer. The CEO did not touch it right away. When he finally did, he nodded once, slowly, as if acknowledging not just my decision, but the fact that he had earned it. "I'm sorry," he said. I believed that he meant it. I also knew it changed nothing. When I walked back to my floor, the office had that eerie post-impact hush buildings get after a public firing, too quiet, too careful. People glanced up when they heard my heels on the carpet and then quickly looked away. A few nodded. One person from analytics actually stood up as I passed, then sat down again as if he was not sure what etiquette applied, when the quiet woman everyone underestimated turned out to be the only adult in the room. At my desk, I packed exactly what belonged to me: my mug, the framed photo of my parents at the coast 20 years ago, before my father got sick, a fountain pen I had bought myself after a brutal audit in my early 30s, two legal pads, the black notebook, and the flash drive labeled personal archive. Nothing else mattered. Nina came over carrying her own coffee and leaned against the partition beside my desk. "It's so," she said softly, "it's true." I looked up. "Which part?" "That you're leaving." I nodded once. She stared at the half-packed contents of my desk, then at me. Her eyes had that glassy shine people get when anger and sadness are trying to occupy the same space. "They should have listened to you." "Yes." "Not bitterness, just fact." She blew out a breath and shook her head. "For what it's worth, half this building's terrified of you now." That made me smile for real. "Only half?" That got a short laugh out of her, but it died quickly. "What are you going to do?" I looked down at the resignation copy in my folder, then out past the windows where the sky was bright and flat with heat. "Something quieter," I said. That was not entirely true. I did not yet know what I was going to do next, only what I was no longer willing to do. I was no longer willing to donate brilliance to people who called it overhead, no longer willing to perform gratitude after a disrespect, no longer willing to keep a machine alive for executives who only noticed the engineer when sparks became visible. By midday, word had spread beyond our floor. I received 4 private messages, 2 texts, and 1 email from a senior manager in another division saying, in so many words, that he admired my professionalism through the recent turbulence. Recent turbulence. I almost admired the cowardice of corporate language. It can turn anything into weather. I did not answer him. At 1:40, facilities arrived with a box for Derek's remaining office items. Through the glass, I could see his motivational mug sitting on the edge of the credenza. Innovate or evaporate. I looked at it for a long moment, and then I looked away. There was no pleasure in his fall anymore. That part had already passed. Once he was removed, the real emotional residue was not triumph. It was exhaustion. And beneath exhaustion, something more tender. Grief for the years I had given in good faith. Not wasted years. I would never call them that. I had learned too much, built too much, become too much. But there is a particular sadness in realizing that loyalty and invisibility can wear the same face for a very long time. At 2:15, the CEO's assistant came down herself to confirm my exit process. She was a precise woman named Celeste, who usually moved through the building like someone insulated from emotion. That afternoon, she looked almost humanly flustered. He asked me to tell you, she said. Thus, that the regulator agreed to an emergency review window based in part on your historical records. I nodded. Good. She hesitated. He also said, and these are his exact words, that the company will be paying for underestimating you for a very long time. I held her gaze for a second. Then maybe they'll remember. She gave a small, startled laugh, like she had not expected that answer, then left. I finished packing a little before 3. No farewell email, no speech, no corridor procession of handshakes and sanitized compliments from people who had watched the insult happen and chosen stillness because stillness was safer. I stood at my desk one last time and looked around. The gray petitions, the low hum of printers, the faint smell of coffee and dry paper, the meeting rooms with their frosted glass and bad acoustics. For years, I had thought that place was proof of my value. Then for a while, it became proof of my disposability. Now it was simply a building where I had done exceptional work and learned an expensive truth. You can be indispensable to an outcome and still be treated as optional by the people benefiting from it. That realization did not make me bitter. It made me free. I carried my box to the elevator myself. No one stopped me. No one tried. Maybe they knew better by then. Maybe they finally understood that some endings do not belong to the institution. They belong to the person who decided she was done asking to be seen. In the lobby, the security guard looked at the box in my arms and frowned. You leaving us? Yes. He shook his head. Their loss. I smiled. I know. Outside, the afternoon hit me in a wave of summer heat. Thick, but bright, almost unreal after the refrigerated chill of the building. Traffic rolled past in slow glittering lines. Somewhere nearby, a food cart was grilling onions, and the smell drifted warm through the air. I stood on the sidewalk for a second and just breathed. No buzzing phone, no urgent email, no executive face waiting to see whether I could save the day one more time. Just heat, noise, light, space. I had one carry-on packed at home already. That part at least I had planned. Not because I am theatrical, because I know myself well enough to understand that after something ends cleanly, I need distance before I can hear my own thoughts again. By 6 that evening, I was at the airport. I checked in with one bag, upgraded myself without guilt, and turned my phone to airplane mode before boarding. Not because I was trying to be mysterious, because I had spent too many years being reachable in every emergency somebody else created. The plane lifted just after sunset. As the city dropped away beneath the wing, all those grids of light shrinking into something almost delicate, I felt the first real peace arrive. Not joy, not vindication, peace. The kind that comes when you stop confusing endurance with destiny. I ordered a glass of champagne because I wanted one, not because I needed to celebrate. Then I leaned my head back and watched the cabin lights dim, while the clouds outside turned silver in the dark. Across the ocean, people would still be working on recovery plans. Lawyers would still be calling regulators. Finance would still be recalculating losses. With some future executive would probably tell the story of the European collapse as a lesson in governance and process discipline. They would build new controls, new reviews, new oversight channels. Maybe they would even hang another slogan on a wall somewhere about respecting institutional knowledge. Fine, let them learn. My part in the lesson was over. A few days later, I was walking alone through a quiet square in a city that owed me nothing. Morning light across old stone, cafe chairs scraping softly over pavement, the smell of espresso and warm bread in the air. Nobody there knew who I had been at that company. Nobody cared. I was just a woman in a cream blouse and dark sunglasses carrying her own time again. That was the gift waiting on the other side of all of it. Not revenge, not the money they offered too late. Not even the satisfaction of being proven right. It was the return of my own scale, the memory of who I was before small men with borrowed authority tried to reduce me to a line item and a joke. I used to think power looked loud, public, immediate. Now I know better. Sometimes power is saying nothing in the meeting because the truth has a longer timeline than ego. Sometimes power is keeping the receipts. Sometimes power is standing still while someone confidently dismantles the only thing protecting them because they made very sure you no longer had any obligation to intervene. And sometimes power is walking away so completely that the people who misjudged you are left with nothing but the cost of the lesson. That is what they never understand until it is too late. Silence is not surrender, not in a woman who has been paying attention.